Hey, how's it going, folks? This is Hellbent, and welcome to AutoHotkey Game Maker tutorial number 6. In this one, what we're going to do is we are going to take the script that we had created, or the little game algorithm that we had created in tutorial number 5, and we are going to add that to Gdip, or we're going to render out the graphics using Gdip, which is a graphics library that's been built for AutoHotkey. Well, I mean, Gdip isn't really, but we're going to be using the library as it pertains in AutoHotkey. So this is, if you haven't taken the game tutorial number 5, what I suggest you do is take that before you do this, because there's going to be the algorithm itself. We're going to be just incorporating. We're going to make a little few tweaks to it, but the main focus is going to be on putting it into rendering it out in Gdip or GDIP or GDI plus, or however you want to call it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over things from that, but this is the I've made a few small little changes, so it's going to look a little tiny bit different for you now. I've made it right now, I've set it to have 10 of the little bot things, or little NPCs running around, and I've changed their size from 20 pixels by 20 pixels down to 7 by 7, because it's going to be a little bit closer mirror to what I'm going to show in a second. So anyway, so here's what we have there. We have these little bots, these little NPCs that walk around randomly. They randomly can stop, change direction, and depending on what values we put into the algorithm, they'll do different things at different times, or have different patterns at different times. And what we're going to do with this is we are going to add this to GDI plus, and we are going to do some special effects with it, maybe tweak the algorithm a little bit so we can do different things. So right now, this one right here, if I click on it, everything spawns it there, and then it goes from it. But anyways, this is what we're going to be doing in this tutorial. So the main focus is just rendering it out into, or putting it into GDI plus, rather than having progress bars like we have over here. Okay, let's jump into it. I'm going to make my script single instance, so that way when I run it over and over again, I don't have to have that dialog box that says, do I want to run it again? I'm going to immediately add in a return, and I'm going to set up my GUI close, label, GUI escape, and exit a hotkey. I'll do control plus escape, which is what I usually do for these kind of things. And all this is going to do for the moment is just going to exit app. And afterwards, we're going to add one more line of code in there, which is going to exit out of the Gdip. So in order for us to use the Gdip library, we need to first initialize it. We need to get some token value. It's not really clear to me. It's not really important. Perhaps later on down the road, I'll actually dive into it and maybe explain the inner workings of what's going on or whatever. But for the most part, it's not really necessary. It's just necessary for us to understand that it's something that we have to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is, up at the top of my script, to make it run a little bit faster, I'm going to use up some of the computer's idle time by setting the batch lines. Now the batch lines, I would do probably a horrible job of explaining what it is, but basically, as our code is executed, after every line or every couple of lines, I think it's every line, it's going to pause for a second. It's basically going to go into a sleep mode, so that way if something else on my computer needs to use a little bit of the RAM or memory, then it has access to it. What we're going to do instead is we're going to change the batch lines from being after every 10 milliseconds to wait. We're going to get it to, like I said, I can't describe batch lines, but anyways, I'm going to speed it up so that way it uses more of the computer's idle time. So the other programs that I have running aren't going to have access to as much processing power. I'm going to suck up a lot of it in this, just so we can render out the graphics a lot faster. As you've noticed, I did what I'll show as a demonstration. Here I've set with, I'll do with 100 bots. if we look at how fast these are moving now, if I was to turn set batch lines off, if I was just to set it to its default, which I think is 10 milliseconds, don't quote me on it, maybe it's 20 milliseconds, but I think it's 10 milliseconds. Now if I try to run this again, they're not going to move nearly as fast. So as you can see, there's a pretty significant difference already. And if I was to make it 1,000 bots, we would really start to see it. Fortunately, when we're using GDIP, we're not going to have as much problems with the speed, and that is because in this, what we're doing is we're moving a control around, and moving that control around, it takes a lot of time. So in order for it to move 100 controls around, it's really sucking up the amount of time that it takes to run through each of the loops. Whereas if we go over to here, if I was to even set to, hopefully this doesn't cause me to lose any frames on the video recording, but if I set this to like 1,000, it's going to slow down a bit, but I mean that's still pretty fast. It's moving now with 1,000 things as fast as it was in the other thing doing only 100. Right, so we're definitely, once we switch over to the GDIP, it's going to improve our performance immensely, as well as make it look nicer. Okay, so let's do that first. I'm going to set batch lines. And if you want to look up more on it, all you have to do is just go to Google, type in AHK set batch lines. And you can go to the documentation page and you can read up on it and how to adjust it and what it's doing. I understand it enough to use it, so I'm happy enough with that. We're going to set batch lines. The next thing I need to do is I need to actually make it so that way we can use the GDIP library, which is where we'll go to next, because I actually forgot to mention a few things about it. So I'm going to do, I'm going to say p token is equal to, I think I can get the syntax right, or the name right, GDIP startup. And this is a function. Okay. So now, before we actually do the GDIP startup, what we need to do is include the GDIP library, because the GDIP library is just basically a bunch of different functions that we're going to call up and use without actually putting them into our script. So to do that, there's a few things that there's a few options we can take. One is you can put the GDIP library into your AutoHotkey main library, and then you don't have to actually include it. So you can use any of the functions without it. For me, for example, my AutoHotkey library is in my documentations folder. So if I go to my documentation folder, if I look up AutoHotkey, there'll be a folder called LIB in that. If I put any functions in, any scripts in that have functions, I can use any of those functions in any script anywhere on my computer. In other words, another option is I can take the GDIP script or the library, and I can put it in the folder that I'm currently working in, and then I can just set the working directory of this script to be the directory that the script is in. So I can say that if I'm in a folder right now, I'm in a tutorial folder in my AutoHotkey tutorial folder. I'm in that. I can put the GDIP script right in that same folder with it, and then I can set the working directory. Actually, I don't even need to set the working directory, but I usually like to set it anyways. I'll set the working directory to be that folder, so it knows that when I call up a function that's not already built into my script, it's going to look in my working directory for that script that has those functions. The last thing you could do is you could find all the functions from the library and include them at the bottom of the script. That's not a very good solution, so we're going to do the first option, which is I'm going to put a copy of GDI Plus or GDIP in my the same folder that this script is in. And then at the top of my script, I'm going to type out pound and then include. And I'm going to include that script. Now, because it's going to be in the same folder that this is, I don't need to specify a path, because just right above this, I'm going to set this directory as the path. And the name of the script is GDIP.ahk. Now, if you don't have this library, what I'm going to do is I will look down in the description, and there will be a link to a pastebin page, and on that pastebin page there will be the GDIP library. So I'll open that up here. I think I have a copy of it here. So there'll be a copy of this which has all the functions that we're going to be using. So create a script that's called Gdip, paste it in, save it, and put it in your folder that you're using for this game. Okay, so like I said, I have to include Gdip.ahk because this isn't in my AutoHotkey library. And above that, I'm going to set the working directory to be a script directory. So I'm setting the everything that I use in this, images, assets, things like that, they would need a path. So I'm just basically shortcutting that path. So I'm saying that, I don't want to type out the full path to the folder that I'm using, so I just say the path is the path to the current directory. And that's it. That's it for there. So I've set single instance force. I need to go over it in my head. I've set the working directory, I've set the batch lines, I've included GDIP, and now I've started up GDIP. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that every time I exit out of the script, I exit out of the GDIP. So, let me see. I don't know what the function is called. I think I know what it is. GDIP GDIP underscore shutdown. So this is another function that's in that library to shut down the token. I don't know. Like I said, I haven't dived into everything that's going on behind the scenes. You're more than welcome to go and spend your lifetime looking all this stuff up. Me, I got better things to do. I know it enough to use it, and that's okay with me. So we're gonna, if we exit out, if we close the GUI, if we hit escape, if we hit control escape, it's going to shut down GDIP. What do I want to do next? Okay, what we're going to be doing is, in order to, the best method that I've found so far, now maybe there is a better method of doing this, and perhaps in a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months, a couple of years, maybe I'll figure out what that is. But for now, I have a very specific method that I'm going to be using in order to render out the graphics without having all that flickering that you might see when you're swapping images, etc. like that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create two GUIs. One GUI is just going to be basically the background and our main way of interfacing with any kind of window at all, like to be able to move the window around, to be able to close the window. And then the second window is going to be a window that sits on top of that, or rather it's going to sit inside of it because it's going to have that as its parent. But don't worry about that. And that is going to be where we're actually drawing everything. So I need to set up those two windows. The first thing I will do is I will do GUI. I'll set up the options for my first window. And I'm going to set this to be always on top. I'm going to do... now, recently I was made aware of some issues with the DPI scaling. So I'm still not really sure all about this whole DPI scaling thing and why it affects things the way it does, and why it doesn't have it set for default to be not such a pain in the butt for people that have higher resolution monitors, etc., etc. But just in case you're one of those people, and perhaps maybe it is an issue with you as well, I'm just going to put this in just because I still don't know much about it, and I want to make sure that when you run this, it works okay for you. So we're going to put, as in the options of our first window, we're going to put DPI scale, minus DPI scale. So I believe this has to do with the really high resolution monitors where basically it each pixel has multiple pixels. I really don't know how it works. I mean, to me a pixel is a pixel is a pixel, but whatever. I suppose if you have a super high resolution computer, you would need some kind of scaling if you're going to be looking at windows that would normally be somewhat small on a regular monitor, and then if you put that on a monitor with super resolution, it's going to be like absolutely tiny. So I can kind of understand with that, but why it doesn't do these things automatically, I don't know. The next thing, I'll set the GUI's background to be black. Oh, by the way, this tutorial is going to be long. If you don't want to watch, that's your call. I don't care. Get out of here. So I've set the color, set that. The next thing I need to do is just show this window, because this window is just going to be something that the other window sits on top of. So I'll do GUI 1 show to show it. I don't care where its X and Y are, but I will give it a width and a height. I'll give it a width of, to keep it similar with the way we had it before, I'll do it 500 by 500. Perhaps if you want, what you can do as a challenge after this is you can try to figure out how to take everything that we do within this tutorial and then rescale it to different sizes, and how to do those kind of things on the fly. Width, height, and I'm going to call it cool background effect. That's the name of my window. Okay, I'm done with the GUI 1 as far as I can tell. Now, what do I need for the second one? Now, the second one has a bunch of options that I don't use hardly, so I'm going to need to actually look at my other script to find out what the code is for it. So there's one style code. It's a hexadecimal code that has to do with creating a layered window. Now, what a layered window is something that I don't know. I definitely am going to be looking it up in sometime in the near future, because I am curious about why it works the way it does. How can I set certain properties of it, etc., etc. But for now, I just need to copy and paste that. So let's build the second GUI. GUI 2, and it's going to have some options. The options I'm going to use is I don't think I need to use always on top, but I'll do it anyways, because this is actually going to be, yeah, I don't think I need it, because I'm going to set the first window as its parent. So let's do that. I'm going to say plus parent, and the parent window to this is number 1. So now, let's say for example, if I was creating window 2 having a parent of 1, let's say if I was doing it show, GUI 2 show, and I specified a X and a Y position, I'm not specifying it within the whole window like I normally would. It would actually be within the GUI 1's window. You should play around. You should create a couple of little dummy scripts when you're done with this, and you can play around with what parent does. Next thing I'll do is I'll remove the caption. So I'll get rid of all the border and everything like that from this second window. I'm going to make it last found, and then afterwards I'm going to get the handle to this window, which is basically an ID, an identifier for this particular window when it gets created. So I'm going to use last found and then use a built-in function in AutoHotkey to actually retrieve the handle to this window. I could do it other ways. I could specify its handle. I could, in the function, I could specify which window I'm trying to get the handle to, etc., etc. But this is a very simple way of doing it. So parent, caption, last found. Now I do need a couple other options, but I can't think of them off the top of my head, so let me come over here and steal some of those options. We'll do the DPI scale again, and then here's the hex code that I want. So I'll just paste those in. This is the hex code to make the window as a multi-layered window. Like I said, I don't really understand what this actually means, but if, let's say for example, if I created a new script and I just created a GUI with this as one of the options, when I run it, that window has nothing. It's completely transparent. If I try to add things to it, they're completely transparent. It's really, I really don't understand exactly what is going on with it, but that is. I mean, if you've ever tried to look up these hex codes on Google search, it is an absolute nightmare. Because there's this other one that I'm gonna be using in a GDIP tutorial, like in a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks or whatever. That is, I think it's 0xe. I went all through the documentation and I could not find that particular hex code in anything, but yet it's used in a lot of scripts, right? So I don't know. Maybe it should be included in the hexadecimal style codes in the documentation. Wink wink, somebody who's in charge of that. And we'll set the DPI scale. Like I said, I'm not going to rush through this. If you want to leave, that's your call. I'm going to take my sweet ass time. You saw the length of the video when we started. Okay, so I have that. The next thing I'm going to do is, I think all I need to do now is just show my GUI, but I'll check just to make sure that I don't have anything else that I'm supposed to be doing. I can just show it. Okay, good. That's what I thought. So we'll do GUI, GUI2, show, and once again, this is going to be related to the parent window. So I'm going to set our inner window to have a border around it of 10 pixels. So it's going to be an inner window that's going to be 10 pixels from the left of the first window and 10 pixels down from the top. So that gives me a dimension of 480 by 480. So I'll set X to 10. I'll set Y to 10. I'll give it a width of 480. And I'll give it a height of 480. And I don't need a name for this one. So the next thing I'll do is now I'll retrieve the handle for that. So I think I'm going to say hwind : equals when exists. So this function, if I remember correctly, because I only looked it up on the documentation once and it was a while ago. This function here, if I don't pass it an argument, it's going to automatically get something from the currently active window or something like that. You can look up the documentation. It's very simple. Go to Google, type in AHK when exist as a function, or just when exist, and then find this function. You can read up on what everything happens, but there's this default where if I don't pass it an argument, it's going to use the last activated window or something like that. So that's why here we're using this last found. Likewise, we use this last found when we're trying to set some of the properties of the window sometimes, like wind set, for example, wind set trans color, etc., etc. Now I need to do some stuff with the GDIP. So those are functions that I don't have memorized, so I'm going to have to steal from my code. So I'll call it the same. I'll call the handle the same. So this is just a variable that's holding the Windows handle that I got from WinExist. And if I look here, we can see what the value that we're actually getting from that. Which should be just a string of numbers, or a hexadecimal code. So we have 0x703FE. So that's what we got returned from our function call here. Next, I need this thing here, and I'll go over them when I pop them over. So I'll get rid of the tooltip and I'll paste these in. I'll separate them a little bit so we can go through them one at a time. Now, these are things I'm not going to be able to describe very well, but at least we'll be able to look at how they're being set up and what things we need to put into them. So the first thing I'm going to do is this HBitmap is what I'm assuming it is. I'm assuming that this stands for what I would normally use as HBitmap, because there is this other function I remember that's called HBitmap. So anyways, this variable HBM is equal to create dib section. I don't know what a dib section is, but it looks like kind of like a bitmap because it's got a width and a height. You can go into the documentation and look up that function if you want. Actually, well, you know what? We'll do that quick. Maybe this is one of the functions that actually has some pretty good documentation. So I'll come into the GDIP library. I'm going to hit Control F, and I'm going to paste in what I'm looking for and find next, and see if I can find that function. Here we go. Function create dib section. The create dib section function creates a dib device input bitmap. Okay, I don't know what that is. Sure, it creates a device input bitmap. I have no idea what that is. That applications can write to directly. Okay, I hope you're with it. You can go ahead and read over this if you want. You can do some searching, find out what any of this means, because you know what, I can read this a dozen times, and then tomorrow I can say to you, the create dib section function, it creates a dib section. Don't you know what that is? It's a device input, device independent bitmap. You know, I can act like as if I actually know what it's doing, but no, I'm just copying it. I don't actually understand it. So we need to pass it a width and a height, and the width and height that we're going to be using is the width and height of our window. I could set it up as variables, and there's probably lots of times where I would want to set up these things as variables, but for now I'm just going to hard code them, so that way I don't have to type out width and height. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm a slow typer. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create compatible DC. What is a compatible DC? Once again, this is going to be one of those things, even if it has the proper documentation, I'm not going to be able to know what it means. I can read it, I can maybe sort of understand a little bit of its context, but no, I would have to learn so many things just to understand what this actually means. This function creates a memory device context. I don't know what that is. Compatible with the specified device. Don't know what that is. Alright, but that's what it's doing. The next thing is OBM. OBM is selecting the object, and the object is getting these two things that I'm passing into it, these things here. So I'm passing it the HBitmap, or whatever the variable that I'm using, and the HDC. And of course, you can change the names of these however you want. So if you get comfortable with typing out this stuff, what I'm thinking of doing, what I'm probably going to do in the long run, is the more I start using GDIP, what I'm definitely going to do is I'm going to be creating sometimes it takes a second to load. But I'm definitely going to be creating a tool that does all this stuff for me, that has all the functions, all the brushes, and everything loaded into it. So I'll have maybe let's say if I want to create a brush, I'll have a drop-down menu of all the different kind of brushes that I can use, and then I can select that, and it gives me all the code that I need. Maybe I'll have some edit boxes that I can input its values, and maybe describe what each of them are doing. Right? Just because right now, if I was to go through it and type out all that right now. Like maybe I'll create it something like this, you know, where I can put a bunch of inputs and just create all this stuff and just have it dumped into my clipboard and I can paste it in. Okay, so that's the OBM. Next is GDIP graphics from HDC. So here we have our HDC. So this is our create compatible DC, device context. I don't know what that is. So we're creating graphics from that compatibility mode. What that means, it's beyond me. Next, we're going to set the smooth. Okay, this one I do know. This one has to do with the appearance of the image that we put on the screen. So with the first parameter we pass is our graphics. And the second parameter is a value between 0 and 4, I believe. And they have to do with how our graphics are going to look. Basically, is it going to have anti-aliasing? Is it going to be crisp, sharp images? Are the colors going to pop, etc., etc., things like that. And you can play around with those values, and in fact, if we have enough time, we'll play around with them to make things look a little bit different. So here is our range of options. 0 is default, high speed or probably high performance is 1, high quality is 2, so that's a little bit higher quality image but slower speed. Maybe it's got some blending with the colors. None, and anti-alias. Okay, so there we go. We got that. The last thing is we don't actually need to call this one yet, but I'll put it up here so that way it's set up. This is updating the layered window. So this thing that we put up here, when we call this function here, it's going to update our layered window, and this is why we needed this hex code up here. And this is what's going to make it super fast, and what's going to make it so that way it doesn't we don't get this flickering and all that. It's going to be really, really nice, everything. And what do we need to pass to it? First we need to pass the handle to the window, and we got the handle right here. Next we need to pass the HDC. Then we need its position. And its position, why do I have it 10, 10, width and height? I'm a little bit curious right now because I would kind of expect this to be 0, 0 width and height, but it's looking more like I don't know. Anyways, I'm gonna set whatever I set for my X and my Y for this window here. That's what I'm gonna use. So perhaps I really don't. What I don't understand is normally if I put let's say if I put a picture control into a GUI, if I wanted it to take up the full GUI, I would set that picture to have an X of 0 and a Y of 0, right? And then I would have the width and the height of my window. Here, I'm typing out the exact same thing that I've already sized my window as. So perhaps I messed up something originally in my original code over in here where I'm not actually looking for the width and height. Perhaps, I don't know. I'm pretty sure this was working okay. So I'm a little bit confused about that. Maybe if you want, you can go into the function and see what it says about it and everything like that. Why I would need basically the X and Y of that window again and its width and height, because I'm a little bit confused about that. But ultimately we can run it, see what happens, and then if we need to make any adjustments, of course we could just make adjustments. So it's not a big deal. So what I'm going to put in here is I'm going to change the width and the height to be our hard-coded 480 by 480. Now hold on. Let me see something. What do I have set as my width and height? Okay, GUI 1 is not the width and height. Okay, never mind. Never mind. Anyways, that's that. I still feel like that's wrong. That feels wrong to me. I'm gonna set it to 0. I'm gonna set it to 0 because that just doesn't seem right. That just doesn't seem right. You know, I know how to test. I was thinking I would test over in here, but this thing goes so damn fast. There's no way I can test that. So what I'm gonna do is currently in this script, I have it set. I've added to the algorithm another option, another thing. In the original algorithm, when it gets to the walls, it doesn't keep going. It stops at the walls. I've added a couple other algorithms, like one is to make it spawn back at the center if it touches the wall, and the other one that I'm currently using has it teleport to the opposite side of the screen when it hits the wall. So what I can do is I can use one bot or one NPC, and I can slow down the frame rate, and I can see, where's my timer? I'm looking for my timer, set timer. I'm going to set this to 300 milliseconds. No, yeah, I'll set it to, this might take a couple of seconds, but this would be important for you down the road, because I mean it's important that you get the right information. Like I said, this tutorial is going to be long. We're already up to 36 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. And now what I should see is, as soon as it gets, there's actually a border of 10 pixels between this and here, but what should happen is as soon as it disappears from here, actually, you know what? I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to get rid of the alpha. This isn't important for you as far as you're concerned. This isn't important. But I'm going to get rid of the alpha so I'm going to try to get a big block. Okay, there we go. So hopefully it doesn't take it to, you know what, I can actually tweak its algorithm so that way. I'll set it to 10, and I'll set, okay, so now it's more likely to head straight for a wall. So what I should see is immediately, as soon as it disappears there, it should automatically go to the bottom in the same, like, one frame apart. And that looked like it did it. Let me try to get a new direct. Okay, hope. Two. I'm gonna hard code its direction to be 2, which is to the right, because I want to see what happens when it gets over here. That looks like it was instantaneous, so apparently it is 10 for, like I said, I don't quite understand why you would set it as the same dimensions that I have, or the same starting X position that I would have there, but that is what we need to do. 10, 10. Okay, that's it for that. Now we're ready to create some brushes to actually draw out our little NPCs. So let me go ahead and steal some of my brushes from over here so I don't have to do that. In fact, I'm actually going to start importing some of our code. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take our object from the original script, and I am going to dump this into here, and I'll put it up at the top of the script so I have easy access to it. So this is our NPC object that we created, and for now I'll just set it to 1. So I've made a few tweaks to, or I'm going to have to make a few tweaks. Actually, you know what, I'm going to grab my tweaked object, and then you can make changes as you want to. So I'm going to grab all of this stuff here actually, so that way I don't have to code it all out again. But I'll cover exactly what it's doing. So this one here that I haven't commented out. This is the object as it was when we last left off, except for the width and the height has been changed. What we're going to do is we are going to, the X is pretty much the same, so I don't need to worry about that. The Y is pretty much the same, I don't need to worry about that. With the width and the height, I have it set up so that way I have a couple of random number generation. I'm not going to be using these ones here, so I'll actually get rid of them so that's not confusion. There's no confusion. But what I will do is I'll keep that last thing there for the moment. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of this and pull out your object and just follow along to the changes. They're very simple. So I've set NPC and index is equal. It has an X, a Y, a width, and a height. Now the width and the height are random variables gotten from a random number generator. So how I did this is what I want is these NPCs to tend to be, I have a range of sizes in pixels that I want them to be, and that's between 3 and 7 pixels. But what I want is I don't want it to be completely random. I want for them to tend to want to be more towards the smaller end. So I want more of the things to be towards the 3 pixels by 3 pixels rather than the 7 pixels by 7 pixels, but I don't want to completely hard code it or anything like that. So all I've done is I've created a number generator. I've set its values to be between 3 and 7 because those are the ranges that I want, and then once it gets that value I put it through a number generator again where the maximum value that it has for the second time it runs through is whatever it got from the first time. So if the first time it runs through the number generator it gets a 7, then it's going to be a range of 3 to 7 again. If on the other hand, if it gets a 3, if this ends up being a 3, it's going to come in here, it's going to be between a 3 and a 3, and it's automatically going to be a 3. Perhaps this one gives us a 4, so it'll be between a 3 and a 4, so I might get a 4 or I might get a 3. Once again, so it's just making it so that way it's going to tend to have all of these images as smaller, on the smaller side of our my random number generator. And then I've set SP to be its width and its height. Next, direction's the same as last time. With the name, I've changed it. I've just set name to be a blank value, because we're going to name the brushes that we're going to be using to draw. So we're going to, in order to draw images onto the screen or onto our bitmap and put them on the screen, what we need to do is create brushes. And the way we're going to use the brushes is each brush is going to represent an individual NPC. And I'm going to name that brush when I make it. I'm going to name it the name of this particular NPC. The last is the last direction. Once again, we don't actually need this, but I still have it set up in the algorithm that it's using the last direction as a counting variable. And the last thing is speed. Now, to get the speed, I'm using whatever we get as the size of our bot plus 1 pixel. So if the size of our bot was 3 pixels, the speed is going to be 4 pixels per frame. If it's 7, then the speed is going to be 8. And the reason why I'm doing this is so that way it creates, when I do that trailing effect, when I do this, let me put this back to, let's say, I'll leave it at 1 NPC. I'll set the alpha back to what I had it before. But don't worry about this, what I'm doing here. I'll cover that when we get to it over there. I think everything is okay. Let me reload that. So to get this trailing effect where I have these individual blocks that I can definitely see a little bit of a black space in between them, what I've done is I've made it, no matter what the size is, its speed is 1 pixel further. So it always leaves this little gap in between it, and then as it fades away. So it really makes it look like we have speed going on. So I'll speed this back up to 10 milliseconds per loop. So this is how I get that speed effect, plus using applying a new layer with alpha, but I'll get into that as we get to it. So that's why the speed is set to the size of the NPC, whatever size we make it, or its width and its height, plus 1. So it always has a little, so it'll move, so if it's 7 pixels, it's going to move 8 pixels forward each time it moves. So let's go ahead, I'm going to condense all of this stuff here so it takes up a little bit less space. I've explained it as well as I can. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a brush. So the first brush I'm going to create is for the background. And I'm just going to create a black brush to be our background because I find it's the most aesthetically pleasing to me. So that's the color I'm going to be using. And it also makes, when we create these little colorful NPCs, they'll stand out more than they would on pretty much any other color. So I'm going to create a brush, and it doesn't really matter what I call this particular brush because it's going to be a one of a kind. So I can call it what they would normally call these brushes, which is like P brush. And this equals a function call to create a solid brush. So I'm going to create a solid brush. So everything, if I create a width and a height or whatever, it's going to all get filled in that solid color. So all our brush is basically going to do is it's just going to hold the value of a color. And every time we want to use that color for that style of brush, which is basically a filled in shape, then we'll use that brush. And I need to get the code for that, or the function for that. And we'll look at. So in the GDIP library, I'll copy this and we'll go over and look at what it's doing. Here's the brush that we're going to be creating right here. So create brush solid. I don't see any documentation about what it's doing, but it's just creating a solid shape that's going to be filled in. And that's our brush, and the argument we need to pass to it is its color. It does have a default color, and it looks like its default color is black, so in fact I don't actually need to pass it any color, but I'll show you how to pass it a color. Here I've had it set up so that way I was passing it a variable from an array list that I had, but we'll hard code it with a very specific value. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass it a hexadecimal code. And rather than what you're normally going to be used to with when we create colors using hexadecimal code, this one has two other parameters in it, and that is the alpha. So in GDIP we can actually use alpha, which is the transparency of that particular thing. So we can make a brush that has a lot of transparency, or where it's mostly transparent, or we can make it completely opaque. And its values range between 0 and FF, or in other words between 0 and 255. So there's 256 different individual values. So the way we type it out is 0x to mean that we're using a hexadecimal code. Then how much alpha do I want? Because we want to have that trailing effect, that where it takes a couple of frames for it to disappear, we're going to use a fair amount of alpha. So I'm going to set this to, let's say, 22. So that's its alpha. Now I need a color, and the color I'm going to be using, this brush is going to be for the background, which I want to be black. So that is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So it has a 0 red component, a 0 green component, and a 0 blue component, which is black. So that's that brush. Now I'm going to go ahead and create brushes for our NPCs. Now, it would probably be smart to optimize code, or to optimize things a little bit, where I use the same brush for whatever, because we're only going to have a couple of colors for the NPCs. So technically we only need as many brushes as we have colors of NPCs. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new brush for every single NPC. So just like I talked about in the tutorial, where the first time we have it set up as a loop and we loop a very specific whatever amount we want, this next loop that we're going to create the brushes in, it's going to have, we're just going to look at how many times we did our loop up here, because every time we loop up here it's going to add to the amount of NPC objects that we have, and we can look at what the length of that total array of objects is. So we're going to do loop, and we are going to loop the NPC object, which is an array of objects actually, and we're looking at its length. So now this is going to loop, so if I created 100 bots, this is going to loop 100 times. Now before I actually get this to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that way I have another bot or another NPC that has a color that's going to stand out from all the rest. So we can actually, so when I add lots and lots of these things, I can actually get it'll be able to follow a very specific thing around to see what it's doing, because then we can get an overall picture, because it's going to be very difficult to track any individual. Other words, so I'm going to say loop, don't loop the length, loop the length minus 1. So if we created 100 bots, loop it through here 99 times. The order that we create the brushes, or rather the order that we paint with the brushes, is going to determine what things sit on top of each other. So in this, we can have multiple things sitting on top of each other. So let's say if I have two NPCs, the NPC that's drawn last will sit on top of the other one if they're at the same location. So keep that in mind for if you're doing things that it comes into effect. So let's say if I'm creating a game where I have a background and I have a foreground, and then I have in the middle I have my player. So let's say if in the background I have mountains, so obviously I want my player to be sitting on top of the mountains, so I would draw it after I draw the mountains. But if, let's say, if I have bushes or something like that I want to pass in front of the player, I'll put those after the player. So it'll be, I'll first draw the mountains, then I'll draw the player, then I'll draw the bushes. So in here, I'm going to use the name key from our NPC. So I'm going to say NPC, and we're looking at the current index. To begin with, that will be the first NPC, or NPC1, and we are going to be using the name. And we're going to say that it equals a new brush that we're creating. So here we used P brush to represent the brush, or to hold the value for our brush. This time we're going to put that in NPC AIndex.name. So now our NPC object has a reference to this brush here, so we can use this later. Let's create a list of a couple of colors. Yeah, let's create a list of a couple of colors that we can use. It's probably you probably really want me to get to adding in and making it move around already, but you know, in the long run, going over this stuff like this is going to make it a lot easier for you to duplicate it and then edit it however you need to and however you want to and whatever you're doing. So spending a little bit of extra time now in the long run is gonna pay off. So I'm going to pull up my color picker. You can use whatever method you want to create your colors. I have my own tool. This is available on my channel, by the way. But I'm going to come up here and I'm going to create a list. I'm going to create an array. And in fact, I hate typing out lists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out another tool. I'm going to pull out another tool that I can use to rapidly create auto object script, because I really don't like typing out all the colons and the quotes and everything like that. So I'm going to create an array of strings, and with this I'm just going to create some colors. So let's go through a couple of colors. I want one NPC to be completely red. No, I'm not gonna put this in my array because I'm gonna hard code one specific. Remember how we did our loop, I said loop the length -1? Well, that's because after that's done, I'm gonna create one last NPC, and that last NPC is gonna have the color that's gonna pop, that's gonna stand out from all the rest of them, and that's gonna be red. So I don't want to use a quite so red color, but you know, I'll make here. Let's make one this. So this tool here, it does everything. It gives me everything I need for the hex code except for the alpha. So what I'll do is I'll copy. No, I need to 0xFF for the alpha, and then I can paste in that. And then I put a space, and now I can do my next color. That's good enough for me. Get color. (0xFF) for the alpha, and then paste in my color. I'm not being very thoughtful about what colors I want to use. I would probably be better off if I had a system of going through, let's say, some red values, some yellow values, some orange values, some green values to create a nice list. But I don't really care too much to do that, and I know you don't want me to do that during this. Let's go with... This time I'm just going to copy all of this, and I'll just put the alpha in. I'll edit in the alpha. So beside the X, I'm just going to add the alpha, so I can get through it a little quicker. Let's go with solid blue. Okay, I'm happy enough. So what do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can make 100 colors if I want, 200 colors if I want. I'm okay with 6 for this demonstration purpose. Actually, I'll make an orange one. I'll make an orange one, which is right about there. Okay, I'm going to call this colors, and I'm going to put that in my clipboard. I can get rid of that now, and I can paste that in. Okay, so like I said, I now have a list of colors that I can use, and to use them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create above my loop. So this is where I'm looping through all these guys. Above that, I'm going to create a variable I'm going to call I. Down here, after it creates the first color, so in here, rather than using a hard-coded value, I'm going to reference, did I call it color or colors? Colors. Colors, and we're going to be looking at index I. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if, when I add 1 to I, if it equals, how many colors do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 colors. So if I equals 8, set I back to 1. So now as it builds our NPCs, it's going to give them all an individual color within those 8. A random color out of those 8. Well, it's not going to be random, but oops, here it's supposed to be I : equals 1. Now, like I said, I've looped through this, the length of the NPCs, or however, -1. So now I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to create the final NPC, which is going to sit on top of all the other NPCs when they get drawn, and it's also going to have a unique color, which is going to be a bright red color. So this one I'm going to hard code. It's going to be 0xFF 0, 0, 0, 0, or all red. Oh, and it's not going to be a index. What it's going to be the length. It's going to be the whatever. So we were looping through the length. So if there was 100, that means that the length thing has 100 in it. So what I'm going to do is this NPC here now is that. It's npc.length, or whatever the length of that array of whatever the length of our NPC array is, that's what this position is. So if we had 100 NPCs, this will deal with 99 of them, and then this will deal with number 100. I think that's it. I think all we need now is a timer. Oh, set timer. I'm going to call it game loop. And I'm going to set it to 10 milliseconds. And then, as you should be used to now, down here we're going to create that. And now we're going to go and I'm going to check to make sure I have everything that I think that I need up in here. I think I have everything I need. But I'm going to check to make sure, because I might... Okay, we don't need a third window. What we do need... Okay, we do need something else. Because... No, we don't. We don't need that. We don't need that. Because that's for my third window. All this message is doing here is looking to see when I click on the thing to move the window around. If that happens, it triggers a function, and that function gets as soon as I release my mouse button, it gets the position of the window, and then it moves the third window, which isn't basically it's not attached. It can move around on its own. So what I'm going to do, as soon as I move around the first window, whenever I stop, it's going to get its position and then move the third window to line up with where it's supposed to. But since we're not using a third window, I don't need that. Create that, create brushes, brush length, yes, NPC length, set my timer. Okay, I think we're good. So now what we can do is go in and start picking out the parts of the algorithm that we need to actually do our code. So in our game, we'll go straight to the game loop, and the thing that we're going to be looping is this. And then we'll just do some edits to it, whatever we need. So we are going to be looping. So the first thing we're going to do before we loop over our game objects and draw them, what we're going to do is we are going to refresh the background. So this is how the drawing animation is. Each frame, we're going to completely draw we're going to take our brushes and we're going to draw completely new shapes using those brushes. So I'm going to completely draw the background again. So let's say for example that I have five of our little NPCs on the screen. As soon as the new frame comes, it's going to completely draw the background black, and then after it draws the background black, it's going to draw the NPCs again in their new location. And then the next frame is going to start, and it's going to completely draw the background black, and then it's going to draw the images. So the first thing I need to do is draw the background. And to do our drawing, we're going to take our brushes and we are going to draw a solid rectangle, or draw a rectangle. So let me find the thing for that. So this is one of the functions that are in GDIP, where I'm going to take a brush and I'm going to call up this function. It's called Gdip fill rectangle. So the parameters I need is, so I'll separate these things so we can look at it a little bit so it doesn't get confusing. The first parameter we need is our graphics that we created, or Gdip graphics from HDC. So this variable that we've created here, that's our first parameter. or our first argument. The second thing that we're going to pass to it is the name of the brush that we're going to be using to fill our rectangle. And in this case, the brush is going to be, I've also named P brush. This is just our background brush, so I've left its name as P brush. So that's fine. P brush is fine. Now we need to specify what portion of the screen we're going to be using this rectangle to fill using that brush, and we're going to be filling our bitmap basically. So this time it's 480 by 480. So I'm going to set it to 0, 0, width and height. And the width and height are 480, so I'm just going to hard code those. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to do, this might actually need to be 1, 1. I'm not sure. You can play around with it afterwards on some other thing, but it's not going to cause us any problems in this. But it might be 1, 1. I'm not sure. So that's it. So this is every frame of animation now. I'm going to comment out these so you can see. Oh, sorry. So this is filling that space, but now we need to actually draw our bitmap. We need to draw our game again. So to do that, we have this function that we created earlier, or that we called to earlier, called update layered window. Each frame of animation that we go through, we're going to draw our shapes, and then we're going to update the window. Draw our shapes, update the window. Draw our shapes, update the window. So we're going to take this function. Now, I noticed before that it said if I specified up here that it has a width and a height, it's going to remember what that width and height is. So I think I'm going to actually make sure, that I have that correct, because if we can eliminate some of the code, then it'll make reusing it easier. It'll make it easier to remember. So update layered window. So yes, so you see here we have optional values for the layered X, width, and everything like that. So let's see what it says about it. If X or Y are omitted, then the layer window will use its current coordinates. So it currently had coordinates that we set before. And if width and height are omitted, then it'll use the current width and height. Okay, so we've already used it, we've already set those values, so now when we call it, all we need to pass to it is the handle and the HDC. So let's go ahead and copy this function. So update layered window, and down here just before the return is when I'm going to do the refresh, or put the image onto the screen. So the only thing we need to pass to it this time is the handle and the HDC. Everything else we can get rid of. And theoretically that should work fine. Okay, now we can run a test. Okay, but we don't see anything because the background was already black. So let's make something that's a little bit more what we want. So I'm going to temporarily change the color of the background brush to red, and it still has a high alpha. So what we should see is it quickly go from black to start changing to red. This will be a good test to see if everything's working the way we expect. And there we go. And in fact, if I really want to push it to see how well it's doing with the animation, I can set the alpha to some really ridiculously low value, and it's gradually fading in. So this is what we're going to be doing every frame. We're going to be taking that black brush that we created for our background, and we're just going to add a layer of it with lots and lots of alpha, so it's not going to completely erase what was there before. So there's going to be like a trail. And it's going to take about, the way we're going to have it set up, it's going to take about 15 to 20 frames in order for it to completely erase the images that we have on top of it, which are going to be our NPCs. So it'll take about 15 to 20 frames for those to almost completely disappear. So I'm going to set this back to being 22 in the alpha and black. So 0, 0 in the red, 0, 0 in the green, and 0, 0 in the blue. So we know that everything's working, so now we just need to put in our code. So I can reactivate this, and I'm going to go grab those functions from our script that we created over here, and there's a few things that we need to edit from it. So down here, after our game loop outside of it, I'm going to paste in those functions. Move NPC this. Okay, so let's go over the first one. We're going to pass the NPC a index, no problem. What we're going to do in here is we're going to draw inside of our move NPC. That's where we're going to do our update for the brush, or we're going to draw that square again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass a second argument, and I think it's G. Yes, the same argument that I passed here for this brush is going to be needed for the other brushes, because all the brushes you pass the same arguments, or at least all the fill rectangle brushes you pass the same arguments. The values are going to be different, but this one is going to be the same. So I'm going to pass G into my function, and then in here it's going to have that copy there. Next thing, we'll get rid of this GUI control move. Now we're going to grab our brush, our fill rectangle, and we're going to change some of its value. So we're going to leave G as it is. Now what we're going to do for this is what we're naming our brush. So in this case, the name of our brush is going to be this dot name, because that's where what we called our NPC a index dot name. So when we passed our NPC to our function, we passed it in with this name here, NPC a index, but when it comes out the other side, we've changed its name to this. So we can type out this dot x, this dot y, this dot. So this dot name is the brush we're going to be using, and now we need its dimensions. Its dimensions are going to be this dot x, or its position is going to be this dot x and this dot y, and its width and height are going to be this dot width and this dot height. So whatever we set in our object up here for its width and height and the x position, that's where it's going to get grabbed from. And then of course we have an algorithm that changes those values over time, or its x and y over time. Okay, let me separate that, and then we'll go through these one line at a time to see if we need to change anything from here. So if direction is 1, the y, subtract from the y speed. I don't think there's anything that we need to change in this one, because this is just checking the direction, so there's no changes from the old script to the new script. So that line is fine. Let's go into here and we'll check out this. During the tutorial before, I had mentioned how because we're only using 4 different directions, our NPC is never going to be both outside of the boundaries on the y-axis and the x-axis at the same time. So we could technically put it all into a single statement. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to take this second statement. So the first statement is set up now to deal with the x, to check if our NPC is in the game on the x-axis. Our second statement was to check it on the y, but like I said, because we only have 4 directions, we only actually we can put both of these into a single statement. So at the end of the x statement, I'm going to put a colon, and then I'm going to drag this up there. So it's all one statement. So we can go through this a little bit faster. So it'll do this logic a little bit faster. It's all just one statement. And in here we do need to make some changes. So we'll leave it for the moment. We'll leave this part exactly the way it is, and then after we're finished editing this, we'll create duplicates of it. After we get the program running, that is, we'll create duplicates of this condition, these statements here, and we'll alter what happens if they're true. So this will give us, so right now if it hits the edge, it just stays at the edge. But we'll create a duplicate of it that we can use instead, where perhaps if it hits the edge, it spawns in a brand new random X and Y location, or if it hits the edge, it teleports to the opposite side of the map. So this one I definitely know we are going to need to change, because there is some things that we don't have. So if X is less than 0, X equals 0, no problem. If this dot X is greater than the game's width, that's something we don't have as a value, as a variable, so we'll just put in here 480, because that's the width of our game board. So if the X location of our NPC is greater than 480 minus its width, then we are going to take this dot X and set it to game.width, which is 480, minus this dot width. Next is the Y. If Y is less than 0, set it to 0. If this dot Y is greater than the game's height, that's not something that we have, so we'll put 480. Then set the Y to the game.height. That's something we don't have, so it's 480. Okay, there, we've made all the changes we need to that to make this work properly. So I'm going to pack this up again. And in this one here, let's see, there might be some things that we need to change. This dot direction is last direction. The last direction is something valid. Random direction 5. One thing that I did with my copy of it is I changed it so that way the NPC tended to stand still a lot more. So instead of saying if direction is less than or equal to 5, so right now here we're setting it so that way we're giving it a new direction if it has a value of 5 or less. So it has 4 directions that are actually moving, and then the 5th one is where it's just sitting still. To make it sit still more often, what we'll do is we'll increase this to, let's say, 7. So there's 3 directions where it's actually sitting still, and then 4 directions where it's moving. So this creates a little bit more of an effect, weird effect. We'll increase this so that it's not so spastic. We'll set it up to 50. So we're getting a random. I went over all this in the last tutorial, so I shouldn't sit here wasting time on that. But I've set the direction. So if the last direction is less, so our counter. This one here, 400, and then once again I'll change it so that way if the number that we get from our random number generator is less than 7, then it's going to use that. So we'll have 3, like I said, 3 things that are with that. I think everything's good. I think we are, knock on wood, but I think we have enough to actually, I think our program runs now. Let me just check over here just to make sure. This is something else. Maybe we'll add this in. We're up to 1 hour and 17 minutes. Might as well make it a 2-hour video. As soon as we're done this, we'll look at doing a couple of things to how to change some of the values to get different effects. But after that, if you want to go, you're more than welcome to. So here we go. We have our NPC, and it moves around. Now, if we want, right now I've set the alpha to a pretty. I could set it much lower so that way we get longer streaks. And I've also set what I'm going to do for testing purposes right now is I'm going to say that no matter what SP equals after a random number generator, it's going to set it to 20. So that way we automatically get a 20 pixel by 20 pixel guy, so we can see them better. Okay, so 20 pixels by 20 pixels. And this is the behavior of our NPC. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the alpha of our backgrounds to a little bit lower of a number, so it takes a few more frames for it to completely cover out the trail that it's leaving. So I'm going to change it from 22. This is our background brush, our P brush. I'm going to set it to 11. And now the trail takes a little bit longer for it to draw away. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to show you the difference with this one little guy, which isn't really a good segment, but the difference between the GDIP set smoothing mode. So right now this is on anti-aliasing. What I'll do is I'll check, let's see what it looks like with 1. It's difficult to tell with this guy here, But if I use smaller ones, it stands out a little bit more, where this is really, really sharp. 2 has a little bit more of a softer colors, so when we get into our other colors, they'll look a little bit more pastel. But we'll leave it at 4. We'll leave it at 4, and now what I'm going to do is let's see if we can add some more bots. So I'm going to re-enable it so that way it's using the random number generator by commenting out this. So now it's picking a number between 3 and 7, and let's create 10 of these guys. Let's try 100 of them. Let's try 1,000 of them. I don't want to add any more because I have it set to set batch lines to -1, and my recording software needs a lot of my computer's memory. So if I go any more than this, I might start dropping frames on my recorder. So I don't want to try. In fact, this would be, if I wasn't recording right now, this would actually be running a lot faster for me. But I'm going to set this to 10, and we'll look at one more effect. This time, the effect that we're going to look at is what if we don't want to redraw the background every frame. So right now we get this trail. What if we don't want the trail? That's the first thing we'll look at. What if we don't want the trail? Well, for our background brush, the color for our background brush, we'll just set the alpha to be fully black, or full alpha, 255, right? And now we don't get that trail. And now we have something that looks a lot more like our NPCs over here, right? It's just these random motion that it's moving. I know some of these smaller ones are probably hard for you to see. So maybe for you, what I'll do is I'll change the range of my number generator. I'll set it to a minimum of 5 in both, and then this one up here I'll set to a maximum of, let's say, 12. So now I'll get numbers between 5 and 12. So you should be able to see them a little bit easier on your screen. I mean, you should be having a version of this running on your screen, so you don't really need to see what mine looks like. But we'll put it back. So this is if I want it to completely redo the background every single frame. I can set it back to having it so we can have that trail again by changing the brush for our background back to having some alpha. Right, so we get the trails, and I can play around with it to make the trails shorter or longer. The other thing what I can do is I can completely remove this drawing that rectangle. So this rectangle here is inside of the game loop, at the top of the game loop, and what this is doing is every single time our game loop comes into it, it's going to redraw our background. What we can do is actually remove that, and our background never gets refreshed, and every single frame we're just going to be adding more of this stuff. So we're completely not going to be removing the background. So all these tails, they stay forever. And we can get some interesting patterns. If we want, perhaps we could set it up so that way it loops through a certain amount of frames, and then it refreshes the screen, and then starts adding these pipe-looking designs again. And then after a certain amount of frames, it clears them, and then a certain frames, and then it clears them, etc., etc. Right? So let me show you how to set that up. So I'm going to create a variable up inside of here before our first return. I'm going to call it num, and num equals 1. In here, I'm going to say if ++ num is equal to 50. So every 50 frames. If it's equal to 50, then change the value of num back to 1 and refresh our screen. For this to work the way I want it to, I need to go back up to my brush and change the alpha to FF, because I'm going to completely redraw over the screen. So now every 50 frames, it's going to redraw our background, so that way it gets rid of all this stuff. And then it's going to continue drawing from there. Maybe 50 frames is too quick. Let's go to 300 frames. And I can see it looks like I might want to no. It looks like I might want to play around with some of these values in here. Because I'm getting a little bit of trailing. I'm not really sure why. So I'm going to try setting this to -1 and -1. And I'm going to set it to go to 485. So basically I'm filling, so we have a canvas, and I'm going to have the paint overflow that canvas, hopefully. Because we were getting some trailing on the edges, so I don't see it yet. Okay, I think that corrected it. So in the brush, or in the fill for that, I just made a quick adjustment. Let's go ahead and create a new algorithm where we'll test to see if our NPC hits the edge of the map. It's instead of it just stopping, we're going to let it teleport over to the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate this out so you can see it a little bit easier. I'm going to take this line here, and because I have an editor that I can do this, where I can copy a line just by pressing a hotkey, I'm going to select in the line, and I'm going to press Control plus D to duplicate that. Then I'm going to comment out the original one, and I'm going to make edits to this one here. So this time, if the x is less than 0, I'm going to take what I would normally do if the x was greater than the width. I'm going to take this stuff here, I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to change that to here. So if x is less than 0, set the x to be the opposite side of the screen. If the x is at the other side of the screen, set x to equal 0. And then the same with the y. If this dot y is less than 0, don't set it to 0. Set it to the height of the game minus the bot's height. If I'm on the right hand side, then set my y to 0. Very easy. We're done. And we can run that. Now they can jump through from one side to the other. All right, we'll do one more. Let's get it. I'm going to get it, turn off that, and get it back to being the way it originally was. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment out this, comment out this. That doesn't really matter, but I'll comment it out and comment out that. And now we're just having that. So every frame, and what we'll also do, I'm going to also do is set the alpha of our P brush back to 11. Okay, so that's if we want it to teleport. This next one, what we're going to do is once again I'm going to duplicate this line, or I'm going to copy and paste it. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to copy this version of it out, and then just before we execute this, I'm going to create 2 random numbers. The first one I'm going to call NX, and I'm going to set it a value between 1 and the... Now I've never actually done inside of a number generator like this. I've never tried using an expression. So rather than having this not work the way I want it to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a temp variable, tx, so that way I can do my equation right here, or I can do the math right here, so that way I don't have to worry if the random number generator is able to accept an expression. Like, by expression I mean taking a variable and adding to it or subtracting from it or something like that. I don't know if this, I haven't actually tried using random number generator to do that, I don't think. So I don't know if it works, so rather than it not working, I'm just going to create a temporary variable. Tx equals, so this is our new x. So what I'm looking for is between the first pixel on the screen and the last pixel that our guy can go, which is this. So we're going to randomly place, we're going to get a value between 1 and the width of the screen. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to duplicate this as well. But, oops, I'm going to duplicate this as well, but instead this one's going to be ty, and ty is going to be this dot y. Oh, this is actually supposed to be, nope, cancel this, get rid of this dot x colon equals. It's supposed to be 480 minus width. This is supposed to be ty is equal to 480 minus height, this dot height. So random nx is in between a range between 1 and tx. Random ny is between 1 and ty. And then we're going to take this here and we're going to, every time it encounters the border, so if this dot x is, if it's less than 0, then this dot x equals our new random nx, our new random x number. And what we'll also do is we'll include a new y position as well. So it won't be just its x that changes if it goes over the x. We'll give it a y as well. So we'll say this dot y. I don't want to type out this dot y. We'll say this dot y colon equals ny. So if x is less than 0, this dot x equals our random new x position, and this dot y equals our new random y position. And then I'm just going to copy this and paste this for all the conditions when it's asked the question. Is x greater than 480? If it is, then give us a new position. Is this dot y less than 0? If it is, give us our new position. If this dot blah blah blah, then give us our new position. And there we go. And I'm going to get rid of wrap. Okay, so that's it. Now we should have, if it hits the border, it should teleport to a random new location. And to see that in effect, we need to just go down to one bot, or one NPC. So if it hits the edge, it should teleport somewhere. There we go. Okay, that is it. I think I had one last thing. So if you want to go now, that's okay. What we're going to do in the rest of this video, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that way if I click on the screen, everything teleports to that location. Okay, so to do that, I need to use a window message. So up at the top of my script, I'm going to set it up so that way I'm looking for a message. So I'm going to say on message. So Windows messages, if you're not familiar, are just basically every time you do anything on your computer, all these messages are passed back and forth about the event that's happening. And they'll have different values and things that they're looking for, etc., etc. And depending on what kind of message gets passed and posted and sent, different things happen. So what we're going to be looking for is a message that says if we click on the screen, then it's going to trigger a function for us. So is it 202 or 200? I'm looking for a message either 202 or 200. I don't remember, so I'm going to look what it is. 201. Of course, it's not 200 or 202. 201. Okay, so I'm going to be looking for a hex code or a message that's 201, and I'm going to I'm going to send this to a function called, I'm going to call it move NPCs. Move NPCs. I'm going to take this and I am going to come down here. What I'm going to do is, to make this simple, super simple, all I'm going to do is if I click on the screen, I'm going to change the value of a variable. So I'm going to come up to the top of the script again, and right underneath here, because I like to be all messy with my code, right under here I'm going to create a global variable so I don't have to worry about its scope at all. So it can go to any function it wants. I probably don't need it global, but I'll set it so that way it's out of the way. I'll set it global, and I'll say I'm going to call this variable is pressed. And I'm going to set it to a value of 0 to begin with. Alright, so now if we click on our window, it's going to trigger that function move NPCs, and as soon as it goes into that function, is pressed, because we're clicking on the GUI, is going to now equal 1. So if we click on the window, is pressed equals 1. Then what we're going to do is inside of our game loop, every time it loops through, it's going to look to see. You saw how this all worked, so I'm going to get rid of that. I don't want that in my code anymore. I want to clean this up a little bit. Okay. Now I'm trying to think, where do I want to do it? I'll do it. I think I had it after. So I think it'll be fine if I do it after again. So what I'm going to do is, in our game loop, each time it loops through, I'm going to check to see if is pressed equals 1. So if we clicked on the GUI, that is pressed variable now has a value of 1. So we're going to, if that's true, then I'm going to take that is pressed, and what am I going to do with it? What do you think I'm going to do with it? That's right, I'm going to set it back to 0. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this dot there's a few things I'm going to do. I'm going to take this, no, it can't be this dot. It can't be this dot because I'm not inside of a function, so I need to use its actual name. So it's going to be npc a index, npc a, oh, that means I have to actually have a loop. So I'm going to loop over, how many times am I going to loop, people? I'm going to loop npc dot length, because we need to loop over all of our NPCs. We're going to loop over the NPCs, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the NPC's X location, and I'm going to set it to equal where our mouse currently is. So we need to do that. So what I need to do, because I don't want to use the whole screen as my thing, I don't want to use the window, I just want to use the client of the current window. What I'm going to do up at the top of the script under set batch lines, I'm going to drop down and I'm going to say chord mode. So I'm going to set the coordinates that I get from calling mouse get position. I'm going to set them relative to a certain thing, based on a certain thing. So I'm going to set it based on the mouse, and it's going to be based on the client area of the window. So if you're not familiar, this is a window. Okay, this is my screen. So I can use the dimensions from my screen. This is a window. The window contains this border as well. So it has all that border as well. Then there's a client area. The client area is the area inside of the border. So that's what we're going to be looking for. The inner part of the window. So I've set the chord mode to be mouse client. In is pressed. As soon as it finished declaring that is pressed equals 0, I'm going to say mouse get position. and I need 2 temporary variables. I'm going to call them, I already used tx, ty. I think I can use them anyways, but I'll do it. Yeah, I'm just going to reuse those 2 variables. Tx to represent the variable x, and ty to represent y. Because that function only gets triggered, that clicking on the GUI only gets triggered if I click on this GUI. Like, I can click on any other window and it's not going to do anything. It's only going to happen if I click on this GUI that it's built into. So I don't need to specify what window I'm looking at or anything like that. I can just use the coordinates, and it's going to be based on the parent window, so the GUI 1. So what I need to do is, when I do this, I need to offset, when I move the NPCs, I need to offset them by that little border that I added around the edge. Because remember, our inner window that the NPCs that are actually on is another window that's sitting inside of the parent window, and it has a border of 10 pixels all the way around it. So when I get the mouse's X and Y position, it's going to be based on that parent window, not the inner window. So when I change the NPC's X position and Y position, I need to, first of all, I'm going to try to compensate for the range of width and heights of the NPC. So I think I have it like a range of 5 and 12. So if I set it to like 7, that's 6 or 7. Let's say 6. So if I let's say if I click, okay? I click, it gives me a value for TX. Now what I want to do is I want to offset that a little bit, so that way when the NPCs spawn, they're pretty much, my mouse will be pretty much closer to the center of those NPCs. So I'm going to say -5. So I'm going to subtract 5 pixels off. So let's say my mouse is right here. Let's say this caret right here. Let's say this was 100. If I want my NPC's center to be right there, then I need to subtract 5 or half of the width of my NPC, so that way half of it's on this side of it, half of it's on that side of it. So that's all I'm doing there. The next thing I need to do is subtract the border that goes around my map, and that's another 10 pixels, so I'm just going to change this to 15. Then I'm going to duplicate this line, and this time it's going to be the y-axis, and the y-axis is going to be ty, which is what we're getting from our mouse get position, ty minus 15. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to completely draw over the window. So right now our background brush has an alpha. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new brush that is solid. I'm going to duplicate this, and then second brush I'm going to call P brush 2. And I'm going to set it to a full alpha, or an alpha of FF. And I'm going to use this brush every single time I press this, so when it redraws the NPCs where my mouse is, it completely refreshes the background fully black again. So I'm going to take this example of the brush up here. I'm going to put this in here. So this is our background brush, but we're going to be using the second version of it this time. So we're going to redraw the background, and then we're going to draw all the NPCs. So actually, let me you know what we're going to do? Okay, I know what we're going to do. I know exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to take this drawing the background, and I'm going to move it above our loop. And then inside of our loop, after it's changed our positions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the move function and set direction function. No? Now I'm just going to call the move function. I'm just going to call the move function because it's only going to be a frame until it gets back there. I'm going to call the move function, and then it's just going to move all the NPCs where we are. Okay, I think that's it. I think now when we run this, if I click on the screen, all the NPCs should jump there. So if I click, 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 click. Let's add some more. Let's add 300 of them. So we have all these NPCs, and then if I click, they jump there and refresh the screen. Click, 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 click. I'm going to change, these guys are too big for me. I need to change them back. 3 and 7. I'll do 7. Okay. And that is it. And what I'll do is I'll switch. I don't like the algorithm or the thing where it's changing them to random locations, so I'm going to comment that out. So I can comment this out, and I'm going to switch back to where it switches them to the opposite side of the map. So that's this one here. So now if I click down here, they should start popping up here, here, and here right away. And we can get some cool effects. Alright, I think that is everything. We're almost up to 2 hours, an hour and 45. I hope you learned something. Let me know what you come up with. Try playing around with the code. Create your own things. I know for me, I'm going to probably use something similar like this, where I might do... What I'm thinking of doing is coming up with a better way of doing colors. So let's see. So I'm going to take in the loop where it's creating the brushes, I'm going to duplicate the brush, and then I'm going to comment it out, and then I'm going to take the end part of it, this the function part, and I'm just going to change the color to be a hard-coded color. And I'm going to use something like a grayish color. 0x. I'll give it a little bit of alpha. AA. And let's go with 777777. Maybe I'll give it a little tiny bit of a bluish tint. 99. Right, so what I'm thinking is maybe not this exact color pattern or whatever, but making buttons or things like that with this as the background, or maybe making maybe the next auto clicker that I make, I'm going to have this as the background to it, or something like that. So then I'll have all the buttons and everything sitting on top of this window, right? And maybe what I was thinking was probably the effect that I like was that loop that I had where it wasn't drawing and then it would just refresh after 100 frames or so. I was thinking something like that maybe. But yeah, that is it. So that's it. Be sure to hit that like button if you like these kind of tutorials, because they take a long time to make. And if you can't take a couple seconds to hit the like button, then you understand why I would never ever ever spend hours creating tutorials for people like you. Okay, have a good day.